Have you ever wondered if giants really existed? Were they just myths passed down through ancient cultures, or could there be real historical evidence behind these legendary figures? And what if I told you that Goliath, the most famous giant in history, was just one of many? His brothers, powerful and deadly, continued the battle long after he fell. Think about it. We all know the story of David and Goliath, right? A young shepherd armed with just a sling and a stone takes down a giant warrior. But here's what they don't tell you. Goliath wasn't the last of his kind. His brothers were just as massive, just as dangerous, and they didn't disappear quietly. This isn't just about ancient warfare, it's about resilience. It's about how giants, literal or metaphorical, can keep showing up in life, and how we need the courage, the faith, and sometimes the right allies to take them down. The story of David and Goliath is well known, but few realize that Goliath was not the only giant. He was part of a larger group of towering warriors, including his own brothers, who continued to fight against Israel long after his fall. The Bible specifically names 4 of Goliath's brothers: Ishbibnob, Soph, Sippai, Lami, and an unnamed 6-fingered giant. These men were not just tall warriors, they were heavily armed champions of the Philistines. Their presence raises the question, were they merely men of great stature, or could they be remnants of something more ancient, possibly linked to the Nephilim of Genesis 6:04? David's victory over Goliath was a turning point, but it did not eliminate the threat of giants. Years later, as David grew older, he faced Ishbibnob, a powerful giant who nearly killed him in battle. Only the intervention of Abishai, one of David's warriors, saved him. This moment signified a shift. David could no longer fight giants alone, and it was up to his warriors to carry on the battle. Each of Goliath's brothers met his end at the hands of David's mighty men. Sap was slain by Sibbekai. Lami was taken down in another battle, and the 6-fingered giant was killed by Jonathan, David's nephew. These weren't just military victories, they were symbolic triumphs over fear and oppression. The significance of these battles goes beyond history. The Bible dedicates multiple passages to these giants, emphasizing that they were not ordinary enemies. Their repeated presence in Scripture serves as a reminder that great challenges do not disappear after one victory. They persist, and new warriors must rise to face them. So why were these giants such a central part of biblical warfare? Were they remnants of a lost race, or simply legendary warriors? Whatever the case, their defeat marked the final chapter in the era of giants in the Bible, reinforcing the idea that no enemy, no matter how powerful, is greater than faith and perseverance. When people think of giants in the Bible, the first name that comes to mind is always Goliath. But what if I told you he wasn't the only one? In fact, Goliath had 4 other brothers, and they weren't just sitting on the sidelines. They were warriors, dangerous, experienced, and just as intimidating as Goliath himself. The Bible makes it clear that Goliath was not an isolated case. 2 Samuel 21:15-22 and 1 Chronicles 20:04-8 record a series of battles where David's men took on 4 other giants from the Philistine army. These battles were just as important as the famous showdown between David and Goliath, but they didn't get nearly as much attention. Maybe because they weren't fought by David himself. Instead, these fights were won by his warriors, the generation that had been trained under his leadership, the 4 brothers of Goliath. The Bible specifically names these 4. Ishbibnob, a giant who nearly killed David in battle. Sippai, a powerful Philistine warrior, slain by Sibbekai. Lami, Jalai's director brother, known for wielding a massive spear much like Goliath. The 6-fingered giant, a warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, a possible remnant of the Nephilim. These weren't just random Philistine soldiers. They were giants, part of an elite warrior class, and likely considered near invincible by their people. And yet, one by one, they fell. Why this matters? These battles weren't just about war, they were about a power shift. When David fought Goliath, he was a young shepherd with no battle experience, proving that faith could triumph over physical strength. But now, the next generation of Israel's warriors had learned how to fight giants themselves. The fact that David's men took down these giants shows that courage is contagious. Once one person stands up, others will follow. A lesson for us today. This isn't just ancient history. We all face our own giants. Fear, doubt, failure. But here's the truth. Giants always fall. The real question is, who will stand up to fight them? Just like David's warriors learned to fight giants, we too must learn to face our own battles. Whether it's overcoming fear, stepping into leadership, or pushing past personal struggles, we can draw inspiration from these warriors. They didn't wait for David to fight their battles, they rose up and fought for themselves, proving that courage and determination can change history. What giants in your life are waiting to be defeated? David was a legendary warrior, a man who had taken down giants before. But what happens when the giant slayer gets tired? That's exactly what happened in the battle against Ishbi-benob, one of Goliath's brothers, a warrior who came dangerously close to killing David. Who was Ishbi-benob? The Bible describes Ishbi-benob as a fierce Philistine warrior. He wasn't just another soldier, he was a giant. 2 Samuel 21:16 tells us that he carried a spear that weighed 300 shekels of bronze. That's about 8 pounds. To put that into perspective, the average spear used in battle weighed only a fraction of that back then. This means Ishbi-benob wasn't just strong, he was a powerhouse, a man who could wield weapons too heavy for normal warriors. But Ishbi-benob wasn't just looking for another fight, he wanted revenge. David had killed Goliath, and now one of Goliath's kin was coming for him. This was personal. The battle, a near-death moment for David. By this point, David was no longer the young, fast warrior he once was. He had been fighting wars for years, and in this battle he grew exhausted. 2 Samuel 21:15 says, David grew weary. Imagine that. Israel's greatest warrior, the man who had once stood fearless before Goliath, was now struggling just to stay on his feet. And Ishbi-benob saw his chance. He charged at David, ready to strike the killing blow. This was it, the moment when the great warrior of Israel was about to fall. Abishai, the warrior who saved a king. But just before Ishbi-benob could land his attack, Abishai, one of David's closest warriors, rushed in and took him down. Abishai didn't hesitate. He struck Ishbi-benob and killed him on the spot. At that moment, something became clear. David's time as a frontline warrior was over. After the battle, David's men turned to him and said, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." Says Samuel 21:17. In other words, David had to step back. He had fought his battles, but now it was time for others to rise up. Why this moment matters? This was a turning point in Israel's history. David had always been the one leading the charge, the one stepping up when no one else would. But now, his warriors had become strong enough to fight without him at all. Unless one goes bad, too. The creative leaders must step aside someday. True leadership isn't about winning every battle, it's about training others to carry on the fight. A lesson for us today. David had Abishai, someone to step in and fight for him when he was weak. We all need people like that in our lives. Who is your Abishai? And more importantly, who are you stepping in to fight for? When people think of the giants in the Bible, most only remember Goliath, but he wasn't the only one. His brothers were just as fierce, just as dangerous, and just as determined to defeat Israel. One of those giants was Saph, also called Sippai. Who was Saph? Saph was a Philistine giant, mentioned in 2 Samuel 21:18 and 1 Chronicles 20:25-11. Unlike Goliath, who challenged Israel openly, Saph was a battlefield warrior, fighting in direct combat. He was one of the last great Philistine champions, and the Philistines relied on him to keep their dominance over Israel. But here's the thing. His fate was no different than Goliath's. The battle against Saph. The Bible tells us that Saph was slain by Sibbecai the Hushathite, one of David's mighty warriors. This wasn't David stepping in with a sling. This was one of his men, trained under him, stepping up and taking down a giant himself. Imagine the scene, a massive warrior standing over 9 feet tall, armored and armed, roaring on the battlefield. And then you have Sibbecai, an elite warrior of Israel, stepping forward to face him, no hesitation, no fear. And in that moment, Sibbecai did what once seemed impossible. He struck down the giant. Why this battle matters. This wasn't just another battle, it was a symbol of a shift in power. When David killed Goliath, people thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. But now, a trained warrior of Israel took down a giant himself. This meant that David's legacy had spread. His warriors now knew how to defeat giants on their own. Lessons from Saph's defeat. 1. Courage can be taught. Sibbecai wasn't born fearless. He learned from David's example. 2. Victories don't always come from the most famous names. We remember David, but Sibbecai was just as important in continuing Israel's fight. 3. Your battles pave the way for others. David defeated one giant, but his actions helped others defeat more. Lesson for us today. We all face giants, obstacles that seem too big to handle. But here's the truth. When one person proves that something can be done, it gives others the courage to try. What giants in your life are waiting for you to stand up and fight? Everyone knows about Goliath, but what about his brother? Yes, Goliath wasn't alone. He had a direct sibling named Lahmi. And just like his infamous brother, Lahmi was a fearsome warrior. Who was Lahmi? Lahmi is specifically mentioned in 1 Chronicles 20:05, where he is called the brother of Goliath the Gittite. This makes him the only giant in the Bible explicitly identified as Goliath's direct sibling. Even more interesting, Lahmi carried a spear described just like Goliath's. The shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. 1 Chronicles 20 verses 25, verse 12. This is the exact same description used for Goliath's weapon in 1 Samuel 17:7. That means Lahmi wasn't just a random warrior. He was trained like Goliath, armed like Goliath, and fought like Goliath. But just like his brother, Lahmi was defeated. The battle, Lahmi versus Elhanan. Lahmi met his end at the hands of Elhanan, the son of Jair, or Jair-Regim in 2 Samuel 21:19. Unlike David, who had used a sling against Goliath, Elhanan fought Lahmi in direct combat. This wasn't a miraculous one-shot victory like David's battle. This was the result of trained warriors standing their ground. Elhanan did what David had done years earlier, proving that Israel's warriors could now take on giants themselves. Why this battle matters. Lahmi's defeat symbolized the end of Goliath's legacy. With Lahmi gone, Goliath's family was no longer a threat to Israel. Elhanan stepping up proved that giant slaying wasn't just for David. Others had learned how to stand against overwhelming odds. This was a battle of training, these fear. David had once fought alone, but now his men knew how to fight giants too. A lesson for us today. We all face battles that seem too big, too overwhelming, but here's the truth. The more we prepare, the less impossible those battles become. David may have started the fight, but Elhanan finished it. Who are you training, and when the time comes, will you be ready to face your own giants? Just like Elhanan learned from David, we must learn from those who came before us. We don't have to fight our battles alone. We can take the lessons of the past and use them to face the challenges of today. When we stand up, we don't just fight for ourselves. We inspire others to do the same. Giants fall, but only when someone dares to face them. Of all the giants mentioned in the Bible, this one might be the strongest. He wasn't just big. He had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Who was the 6-fingered giant? The Bible introduces this unusual warrior in 2 Samuel 21:20 and 21 Chronicles 20:6-7. It describes him as a man of great stature, with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Now, at first glance, this might seem like a minor detail, but it actually has deep significance. In ancient times, physical abnormalities were often seen as signs of supernatural power or divine favor. Some believe this 6-fingered warrior may have been a last remnant of the Nephilim, the mysterious giant-like beings mentioned in Genesis 6:04. But despite his size, strength, and unique features, his fate was no different than Goliath's. The battle, Jonathan vs. the last giant. This warrior stood on the battlefield, mocking and challenging Israel, just as Goliath had once done, but this time it wasn't David who stepped forward. It was Jonathan, the nephew of David. Goliath jumped in and violently fought and killed him in battle, proving once again that Israel's warriors had learned how to fight giants. This moment was symbolic. The next generation had fully stepped into their role. Why this battle matters. This wasn't just about one giant falling. It was the final nail in the coffin for the Philistine giants. After this, the Bible never mentions another Philistine giant. The war against giants was over, and it was Jonathan, not David, who delivered the final blow. Lessons from this battle. 1. Every generation must fight its own giants. David started the war, but Jonathan finished it. 2. Strength alone does not guarantee victory. This warrior had extra fingers, extra toes, and probably extra strength, but he still lost. 3. Faith and courage always triumph over intimidation. Giants may look powerful, but they always fall. A lesson for us today. Every era has its own challenges, its own giants, but the lesson of this story is clear. With faith, courage, and determination, every giant will eventually fall. The only question is, who will step forward to fight? This was it. The final moment. The last battle against the Philistine giants. For years, these towering warriors had terrorized Israel, standing as symbols of fear, oppression, and seemingly unbeatable challenges. First, Goliath fell. Then, one by one, his brothers followed. And now, with the fall of the 6-fingered giant, the war against giants was over. The moment everything changed. Imagine standing on that battlefield. The last of the Philistine giants had just been slain, not by David, but by Jonathan, his nephew. For the first time in generations, Israel no longer feared giants. But what made this moment so powerful wasn't just the victory itself. It was what it represented. This wasn't just a military battle. It was a spiritual and cultural transformation. David started the war, but his men finished it. Gideon had been replaced with faith. The legacy of courage had been passed down, a turning point in biblical history. Up until now, giants had always been a massive threat, in biblical history? The Israelites had feared the Nephilim in Numbers 13:33, believing they were too powerful to defeat. The Philistines had relied on giants to intimidate their enemies. But now, that era was over. The fact that David's warriors, not David himself, took down these giants proves something important. Victory isn't about one person. It's about the team, the nation, the people who rise up together. Lessons from this battle. 1. Every giant will eventually fall. No enemy is invincible, not even the ones that seem the most terrifying. 2. Faith is stronger than fear. The moment Israel believed they could defeat giants, they did. 3. The greatest leaders train others to fight. David didn't have to be the one to win every battle. His warriors were ready to carry on the fight. Lesson for us today. This moment in history isn't just about ancient battles. It's about the battles we face today. Giants still exist, just in different forms. Fear, doubt, challenges that seem impossible. But if this story teaches us anything, it's this. With faith, courage, and the right people by our side, no giant is too big to fall. The war against giants wasn't won in a single battle. It was won over time, through faith, courage, and perseverance. David may have started the fight, but his warriors finished it. This story teaches us that fear only has power when we let it. Every generation must face its own giants. The question is, will we rise to the challenge? With the right mindset, the right training, and the right people beside us, no giant is too big to fall. So, what giants are you facing today? And more importantly, who are you preparing to fight them with?